What if the gods never left, but simply learned to hide? Beneath the desert sands of Iraq, beneath the limestone plateaus of Egypt, beneath the forgotten temples of Peru, there might exist something that changes everything we think we know about ancient history. Not ruins, not artifacts, but presences, watching, waiting, recording everything that has happened since the moment we believe they departed into the stars. Tonight, we're going to explore a possibility that mainstream archaeology dismisses, but that ancient texts, modern discoveries, and unexplained phenomena continue to suggest. What if the beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, never actually left? What if instead of ascending back to some distant planet or dimension, they simply went underground? What if the return that so many ancient prophecies speak of isn't a return at all, but an emergence from places they've occupied all along? This is a channel dedicated to exploring the Anunnaki and Sumerian civilization through the lens of sleep documentaries. Here, we take ancient mysteries and transform them into meditative journeys that help you drift into restful sleep while expanding your understanding of humanity's deepest enigmas. If you find value in this exploration, I invite you to like this video and subscribe for more content that bridges the ancient world with modern wonder. Before we descend into the depths of this mystery, take a moment to settle in. Dim your lights, adjust your pillows, let the weight of the day begin to lift from your shoulders. We have a long journey ahead, through limestone chambers and clay tablets, through archaeological sites and classified research, through the whispers of ancient priests and the calculations of modern scientists. Where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. There's something profound about knowing that across the world, people are gathered in darkness, all wondering the same thing. What if we've been looking for the gods in the sky when they've been beneath our feet all along? Section 1. The last recorded departure. Let's begin at the beginning, or rather, at what was supposed to be the ending. Most people who study the Sumerian texts say the Anunnaki, those mysterious figures who supposedly kickstarted civilization, taught us how to farm and read the stars, built the first cities and set up the first kings, eventually just left. The stories talk about them rising up, heading back to the heavens, stepping away from human business. Scholars usually call this myth, chalking it up to the way ancient religion shifted as civilization grew up. Basically, people stopped needing to explain every new thing as some god's doing. But are we really reading those texts right? Maybe, in trying so hard to make sense of old beliefs with modern logic, the experts missed something big, something right there in the words. Picture yourself standing in the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. The place feels like a shrine to the ancient world. Huge stone bulls glare from the walls. The vaults hide thousands of cuneiform tablets, each one a scrap of memory from civilizations gone for 3,000 years. It's cool inside, almost chilly, the perfect temp to keep the clay safe. There's a certain smell, dust from ages past, a hint of conservation oils, a sharp edge from the climate control humming away. Your footsteps echo as you pass cases filled with cylinder seals, bronze daggers, even jewelry that Sumerian priestesses once wore. A curator leads you deeper, past the usual exhibits, through doors only staff can open, down a hallway that regular visitors never see. You're heading into the real archives, where the most crucial artifacts live, not the prettiest, but the ones that matter. These are the tablets that eat up entire academic careers. Some are just fragments, but if anyone could fully translate them, they might actually change what we think we know about history. Inside one of those vaults, cataloged, translated, and basically ignored by the outside world, there's a small clay tablet. It's covered in neat rows of cuneiform and on the surface looks pretty standard. It's just an administrative record from around 2100 BCE, listing offerings made to the Anunnaki. Nothing weird there. Temples always kept track of what they gave to the gods: bread, beer, animals, all the usual ritual stuff. But in 2003, Dr. Margaret Cohen, who specializes in these routine Sumerian records at the Oriental Institute, published a paper in a barely read academic journal. Her study, Anomalous Directional Indicators in Late Sumerian Offering Texts, didn't make much noise outside a handful of experts. But Dr. Cohen noticed something odd, what she called linguistically peculiar phrasing, in a few tablets that described offerings to the Anunnaki. This particular tablet spells out a detail that stumped scholars. The offerings weren't just sent to the temple or up to heaven. They were delivered to the depths beneath the temple of Eridu. The Sumerian is even more direct, down into the dark house, or into the foundation of the earth house. Not up, not to some far-off sky realm, not even to the visible temple, down, beneath, into the earth itself. The language couldn't be clearer, and it keeps repeating. When Sumerians wrote about offerings to sky gods like En, they always described sending things upward, to the high place, to the ascending house. But in this tablet and a few others like it, the words all point down, no mistaking it. Dr. Cohen played it safe in her article, suggesting maybe the offerings went to shrines or statues hidden in underground rooms beneath the temple. That's a reasonable, careful academic guess. But in private, talking with other researchers, and a few have confirmed this, she let her guard down. What if those offerings weren't just for statues? What if they were meant for someone or something actually living under the temple? The Temple of Eridu was considered by the Sumerians to be the oldest sanctuary in the world, the first place where the Anunnaki established contact with humanity. Archaeological excavations conducted by Iraqi and international teams between 1946 and 1949, led by British archaeologist Seton Lloyd and Iraqi archaeologist Fuad Safar, revealed something remarkable. Beneath the visible temple, there were 17 earlier temples, each built directly atop the ruins of the previous one, stretching back to approximately 5400 BCE. Think about that for a moment. 17 successive temples, each carefully constructed on the exact same spot, each incorporating the foundations of the previous structure, maintained continuously across nearly 3,000 years. This wasn't just religious continuity, it was obsessive reconstruction, as if that specific location, that exact spot, held significance that couldn't be abandoned even when temples crumbled and civilizations fell. The excavation report, published in 1947, describes the painstaking work of removing each layer of temple debris, photographing and documenting every wall, every altar, every foundation stone. As the archaeologists dug deeper, they found that the earliest temples, those from 5400 BCE or earlier, were actually more sophisticated in some ways than later ones. The stonework was more precise. The interior chamber proportions followed complex geometric ratios that wouldn't appear again in Mesopotamian architecture for thousands of years. It's as if the earliest builders possessed knowledge that was gradually lost over time, requiring later generations to rebuild according to half-remembered plans, copying forms whose original purpose had been forgotten. But here's what keeps researchers awake at night. What wasn't fully detailed in the official excavation reports, but was mentioned in field notes and private correspondence between the excavators. Beneath even the oldest temple, ground-penetrating radar and seismic surveys conducted in the late 1940s suggested the presence of chambers, cavities in the earth that shouldn't exist given the local geology. The excavators wanted to investigate further. They proposed extending their dig downward, following what appeared to be a stone staircase descending from the floor of the earliest temple into the bedrock itself. But the Iraqi government, citing concerns about the water table and the structural instability of the ancient temples above, refused permission. The water table in that region is indeed high. The ancient Persian's Gulf shoreline was much closer to Eridu than it is today, and the site sits in an area where groundwater is near the surface. Extensive excavation of underground chambers would require sophisticated pumping systems and shoring, resources that weren't available in the 1940s. but some researchers involved in the excavation suspected other motivations for shutting down the deeper investigation. In letters between team members, now archived at the British Museum, there are references to local opposition from religious authorities and concerns about disturbing something that should remain undisturbed. One archaeologist wrote, "The workers became increasingly reluctant to dig in the deepest levels." Several claimed to hear sounds from below the temple floor, not water movement or settling stone, but voices, they said, chanting in the old language. The site's remote location in southern Iraq, in an area that has been politically unstable for much of the past 70 years, has prevented thorough investigation with modern equipment. But the data that does exist, the original seismic readings, the radar surveys, the excavation reports with their carefully neutral language, all point to hollows beneath the sacred precinct, spaces that might extend deep into the earth. What could they be? Perhaps natural caves, some geologists suggest, formed by water erosion in the limestone bedrock beneath the alluvial plain. Perhaps ancient cisterns or storage chambers, archaeologists propose, dug by the earliest inhabitants for purely practical purposes. These are rational explanations, safe explanations, the kind that peer review committees accept and that don't raise uncomfortable questions. But the Sumerian texts offer another explanation, one that mainstream academia categorically rejects, but that deserves our consideration tonight, here in the darkness, as we allow ourselves to wonder about possibilities that daylight dismisses. The texts speak of the Abzu, sometimes translated as the cosmic ocean, sometimes as the deep waters beneath the earth, sometimes simply as the deep. It was described as the domain of Enki, the wisest of the Anunnaki, the one most sympathetic to humanity, the god of wisdom and fresh water and magical knowledge. The Abzu wasn't metaphorical in Sumerian thought. It was a place, a physical realm beneath the surface where Enki dwelled, where he kept his knowledge, where he worked his crafts and made his plans. The texts describe it with geographical specificity. It was beneath Eridu, accessed through passages from the temple, protected by guardians, forbidden to ordinary humans. In one hymn to Enki, preserved on multiple tablets and clearly considered important enough to copy and recopy across generations, the god's dwelling is described with remarkable detail. In Eridu, the pure place, he built his house of silver and lapis lazuli. Its foundation was laid on the Abzu, the shining place. Deep waters, the place where no outsider could look. The place of the divine powers, the place of destiny determining, where Enki sits in wisdom, where the sacred me are kept, where the tablet of destinies rests. This isn't vague religious poetry. It's architectural description. The house has a foundation. That foundation rests on the Abzu. The Abzu is explicitly deep waters and a place that exists in physical space. A place where things are kept, where someone sits, where tablets rest on surfaces. Temple hymns describe priests descending into the Abzu, into the house of wisdom that no outsider can penetrate. The Sumerian word used is shed, which means to go down, to descend, used in contexts that clearly indicate physical downward movement. These weren't spiritual descents into meditation or prayer, weren't metaphorical journeys of the soul. The language is geographical, architectural, literal. They went down, into the earth, into chambers that connected to deeper chambers, into a realm the texts insist was real, was physical, was inhabited. In one ritual text describing the initiation of high priests of Enki, the initiate must descend into the house of wisdom, into the Abzu where Enki speaks, where the dark waters flow, where the me shine like stars in the depths. The ritual takes 3 days and 3 nights, not a quick symbolic gesture, but an extended journey into underground spaces where the initiate undergoes transformation through encounter with divine knowledge. What if the departure of the Anunnaki that so many texts reference wasn't an ascension into space, but a descent into the earth? What if the cuneiform words we translate as "they returned to heaven" could just as accurately mean They went back to the high places beneath. The deep vaults, the great halls carved from bedrock, the extensive underground complexes that modern archaeology has only glimpsed in fragmentary seismic data. Think about it from a practical standpoint. And let's pause here to acknowledge that we're blending speculation with archaeology, mythology with possibility. But stay with me, because the pattern we're tracing appears across too many cultures to dismiss entirely. If you were an advanced civilization, far more technologically sophisticated than the humans you'd been guiding, and you decided that direct intervention was no longer beneficial, that humanity needed to develop on its own, would you leave the planet entirely? Would you board ships and fly back to some distant world, abandoning thousands of years of work, cutting all ties, rendering yourself unable to observe or intervene if things went catastrophically wrong? Think about the logistics alone. If the Anunnaki came from another star system, even the nearest ones are light years away. Alpha Centauri, our closest stellar neighbor, is 4.37 light years distant. With our current understanding of physics, traveling that distance would require either journey times measured in thousands of years, or technology so advanced it approaches what we'd call magic, warp drives, wormholes, technologies that bend space and time themselves. Would beings who'd invested millennia in shaping human civilization, who'd built cities and taught agriculture and established kingship, simply abandon all of that on a one-way journey back to a distant homeworld? Would they leave behind no observers, no way to monitor whether their grand experiment succeeded or failed? Or would you withdraw to a place where you could monitor human development, where you could maintain your archives and your technology, where you could remain in your laboratories and libraries and habitations, hidden from surface civilizations but ready to emerge if necessary? A place that required no faster-than-light travel, no generation ships, no abandonment of resources and infrastructure that had taken centuries to establish. The second option seems far more logical, far more practical, far more aligned with how any intelligent species would actually behave when faced with the decision to step back from direct intervention. And here's where the evidence becomes intriguing, where the threads of ancient texts, modern archaeology, and witness testimony begin to weave into a pattern that's difficult to dismiss entirely. But first, let's take a breath. Let your shoulders relax. Perhaps you've already begun to drift, your conscious mind loosening its grip, allowing these ideas to flow through you like water through ancient channels. The night is deep outside your window. The world is quiet, and we have so much further to descend before this journey ends. Section 2. The Underground Sites of Antiquity. All over the ancient world, from Turkey to Egypt to Peru, archaeologists keep stumbling on these enormous underground networks that just don't add up. They're not tombs. They're not basic storage. We're talking about vast underground cities, carved right out of bedrock, big enough to shelter tens of thousands. And the crazy part, no one really knows how people built them, even after years of digging and debate. Let's head to central Turkey, to Cappadocia. If you've ever seen photos, the place looks like the moon, strange pillars, soft volcanic rock everywhere, shaped by wind and rain for ages. Tourists flock there for the fairy chimneys and the old cave churches, but the real story is what's hidden underneath. Back in 1963, a guy in Derinkuyu was renovating his basement when he knocked down a wall and found a tunnel. That tunnel led to a room, and that room to more tunnels. Pretty soon, archaeologists realized they were standing on top of one of the biggest underground cities ever, Derinkuyu. The place drops at least 85 meters straight down, with 18 levels already mapped. Some experts think there are even deeper sections no one's reached yet. Picture being the first person to step inside. You're in the basement of a regular house, pointing a flashlight into a black tunnel cut from solid rock. The walls are smooth, almost shiny, meeting at perfect right angles. The ceiling's about 7 feet high, and it just keeps going. You go down a few steps and the temperature changes right away. Outside it's blazing hot. Anatolia in the summer can hit 90 degrees. But down here, it's always 55. Winter or summer, and the air's fresh, not stale or musty. Turns out they built an elaborate ventilation system with shafts running from the surface all the way through the city. Air flows everywhere, even to the lowest chambers. As you get deeper, the whole thing gets more and more impressive. This isn't just a cave or emergency hideout. It's a full-blown city, designed and built with serious skill. They think up to 20,000 people could have lived here, along with their animals, food, wine, everything. That's like burying a whole small town under the ground and making it work. Those air shafts, they aren't just cracks in the ceiling. They're carefully planned, angled just right so air keeps moving, carbon dioxide doesn't build up, and people can breathe 280 feet underground. Modern engineers have looked at the system and still scratch their heads. No fans, no pumps, just gravity, temperature differences, and smart design. They also dug wells straight down into the rock to hit water deep below. Drilling like that, keeping a shaft perfectly straight for 200 feet or more, should have been impossible for Bronze Age folks. But the wells are there. They still give water. Then there are the stone doors. Huge circular slabs, some weighing tons, set up so one person can roll them shut or open. Once closed, nobody's getting through. They could block off whole sections, protecting people from outside threats, or weirdly from whatever was lower down. That last part is wild. Some doors don't just block off hallways from above. They seal off passages leading deeper underground. A few of those passages are still closed because modern teams can't budge the doors or cut through them. What's under there? Why lock something away so tightly that even the city's own people couldn't get to it? Scientists carbon-dated stuff they found inside and traced the city back to the Hittite era, around 1500 BCE. But a lot of Turkish archaeologists, like Dr. Ömer Demir from Nevşehir University, think the deepest layers might be much older, maybe as far back as the Bronze Age or Neolithic, something like 5000 BCE or more. That's as old as the very first Sumerian cities, or those ancient temples buried in Eridu. Dr. Demir, in a 2015 paper published in Turkish archaeological journals, but rarely cited in Western literature, noted something peculiar about the tool marks in the deepest accessible chambers. He wrote, "The cutting patterns show a sophistication inconsistent with known Neolithic or early Bronze Age stoneworking techniques. The marks suggest a cutting tool harder than the volcanic tuff being cut, perhaps hardened bronze or even iron implements. Yet iron working in Anatolia isn't documented until after 2000 BCE. Either our dating is wrong, or our understanding of technological development in this region is incomplete. Moreover, some of the deepest chambers show evidence of intense heat, stone that's been partially vitrified, melted and resolidified, in patterns that don't match normal volcanic activity or fire use. Dr. Demir speculated about industrial processes we don't understand, and thermal techniques that exceed what oil lamps or wood fires could produce. But here's the question no one can answer satisfactorily. Why? The standard explanation is that these were refuges, places where local populations could hide during invasions. The region did face numerous conflicts over millennia. Hittites, Persians, Romans, Arabs, Byzantines all fought over Anatolia. During times of invasion, the reasoning goes, entire populations would retreat underground, sealing themselves in until the danger passed. But this explanation struggles under scrutiny. Building a complex of this scale would require decades of work, possibly generations. Modern engineers estimate it would take thousands of workers' years to excavate the 2.5 million cubic feet of rock that had to be removed to create Derinkuyu. It would require removing millions of tons of stone, removing it somewhere, disposing of it without creating massive visible mounds that would alert enemies to the city's presence. It would require sophisticated planning and engineering. Every ventilation shaft had to be calculated precisely. Every water well had to be drilled to exact depths. Every chamber had to be positioned to avoid cave-ins. Every passage had to connect logically to create a functional city rather than a chaotic maze. All for temporary refuges used only during occasional periods of warfare. All for spaces that would sit empty and unused for years or decades between invasions. The effort-to-utility ratio doesn't make sense. It's like building a nuclear bunker capable of housing 20,000 people in your backyard, just in case there might be a war someday. The investment is wildly disproportionate to the threat. Moreover, analysis of the tool marks in the deepest chambers shows cutting techniques that didn't exist in any known Anatolian culture. Dr. Andrew Collins, a British researcher who has studied the site extensively since the 1990s, notes that the engineering sophistication suggests knowledge that shouldn't exist in the historical periods we're attributing to these structures. In his 2013 book, Beneath the Pyramids, Collins documented his investigation of Derinkuyu and similar sites. He brought in structural engineers from MIT to analyze the chamber designs and ventilation systems. Their conclusion, stated carefully in academic language, was that the engineering principles demonstrated in these complexes are consistent with knowledge of thermodynamics, geology, and architectural loading that isn't documented in this region until Hellenistic or Roman times, at least 1,000 years after the conventional dating of these structures. One engineer, Dr. Sarah Chen from the MIT Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, noted something even stranger. Several of the deeper chambers show signs of being built to withstand enormous pressure from above, as if the designers expected massive weight or force to be applied to the ceiling. This makes no sense for an underground refuge, where the primary threat would be invasion from surface entrances. But it makes perfect sense if these chambers were built beneath something else, something extremely heavy, something that might be built above them later. What could that be? What were the original builders expecting to be constructed above their underground city? Or, and this is where the speculation deepens, what if Derinkuyu wasn't built as a refuge for humans fleeing surface wars, but as an extension or even a rediscovery of something much older? What if the deepest levels, the ones that remain unexplored because they're flooded or blocked by collapsed rock, or sealed by those massive stone doors, connect to chambers that predate known human civilization? What if Derinkuyu is just the top of something much larger, much older, that extends deep into the Anatolian bedrock? The Cappadocian underground cities aren't unique. Derinkuyu is the largest discovered so far, but there are at least 36 other underground cities in the region, some connected by tunnels extending for miles through solid rock. The network, when fully mapped, might connect settlements across dozens of miles, creating a subterranean civilization that parallels the surface world. And Cappadocia isn't the only place where such complexes exist. In Egypt, beneath the Giza plateau, ground-penetrating radar and seismic studies conducted by teams including researchers from Boston University in the 1990s have identified extensive voids beneath the surface. Not the known chambers of the pyramids, but separate cavities, some natural but some showing regular geometric patterns that suggest artificial construction. Dr. Thomas Dobke, a geophysicist from McBride Ratcliffe and Associates in Houston, Texas, conducted some of the most thorough seismic surveys of the Giza Plateau in 1991. His team used seismic refraction and reflection techniques, the same methods used to map oil deposits deep underground, to create a three-dimensional model of what lies beneath the pyramids and the Sphinx. The results were fascinating and deeply puzzling. Dobke's team identified several large subsurface anomalies, voids or chambers that showed up as distinct echoes in the seismic data. Some of these anomalies were expected: known tomb chambers, the natural limestone cave systems that exist throughout the region. But others weren't on any archaeological maps, weren't mentioned in any historical records, weren't acknowledged by Egyptian authorities. one particularly large void, roughly 100 feet long, and positioned directly beneath the causeway connecting the Sphinx temple to the second pyramid, showed characteristics that troubled the geophysicists. The cavity appeared to be rectangular, which natural caves don't typically form. The walls returned unusually clean echoes, suggesting smooth surfaces rather than rough natural rock. And strangest of all, the chamber appeared to be empty. No collapsed fill, no sediment, nothing but air space deep beneath the plateau. Doki proposed drilling a small exploratory borehole to investigate, using core sampling techniques that wouldn't damage the archaeological site. His proposal was denied by Egyptian authorities, who cited concerns about structural stability and the sanctity of the monuments. When Doki pressed the issue, pointing out that core sampling is standard archaeological practice and causes minimal disturbance, his research permits were revoked and he was asked to leave Egypt. In 1993, Dr. Doki gave an interview to American researcher John Anthony West for a documentary about the Sphinx. In that interview, which was filmed but most of which never aired, Doki stated, "There's something under the Giza plateau that we're not being allowed to investigate. I can't tell you what it is because I don't know. We were stopped before we could find out. But I can tell you that the seismic data suggests chambers, tunnels, possibly extensive underground construction. And I can tell you that someone doesn't want us looking at it too closely." Egyptian authorities have been notoriously protective of the Giza site, limiting the scope of investigations that might challenge established chronologies or suggest the presence of chambers not mentioned in official records. But the data that has been published, the seismic surveys that have been completed despite official restrictions, all point to a network of passages and rooms beneath the plateau, possibly connecting the pyramids with the Sphinx and extending toward the Valley Temple. Ancient Egyptian texts reference these chambers. The pyramid texts, some of the oldest religious writings in the world, inscribed in the tombs of pharaohs from the 5th and 6th dynasties, around 2400 BCE, speak of the ways of the hidden ones beneath the earth. They describe the pharaoh's journey after death through a subterranean realm called the Juat, encountering guardians and gates, descending through levels until reaching the throne room of Osiris in the depths. Mainstream Egyptology interprets the Juat as purely symbolic, a metaphorical afterlife journey, not a description of physical places. But what if we're reading it wrong? What if the pyramid texts, like the Sumerian hymns describing descent into the Abzu, are describing actual underground chambers where actual rituals took place? The Book of the Dead, a later collection of funerary texts, describes chambers in the Juat that are not metaphorical realms of the afterlife, but physical places beneath the ground where the gods dwelt, and where certain initiated priests could venture. One spell describes a chamber called the Hall of Two Truths, where the deceased's heart is weighed against the feather of man. The text gives dimensions for this hall, 120 cubits long, 40 cubits wide, and describes architectural features like pillars and doorways. Why give measurements for a metaphorical place? Why describe architecture for a spiritual realm? Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt around 450 BCE, wrote of being told by Egyptian priests about massive halls beneath the Giza complex, filled with the records and wisdom of the ages, protected by guardians who ensured that only the worthy could access this knowledge. He described these halls as real places that the priests claimed to have visited, though they refused to take him there. Scholars typically dismiss this as legendary embellishment, the sort of tall tale that ancient historians love to record, fantastic stories that make good reading but have no basis in fact. But what if the priests were describing something real? What if Herodotus was accurately recording information about underground chambers that existed then, and that might still exist now, sealed and hidden beneath the sands? In 2008, Dr. Zahi Hawass, then Egypt's Minister of Antiquities and the most powerful archaeological authority in the country, gave an interview to an Egyptian television station. During that interview, video of which mysteriously disappeared from most archives shortly after airing, though fragments remain on conspiracy theory websites. He made a startling statement. The interviewer asked about rumors of secret chambers beneath the Sphinx and Giza Plateau. Dr. Hawass, who usually dismissed such questions with scientific skepticism, paused and then said, "I cannot tell you everything we know. There are things beneath Giza that the world is not ready. When the time is right, when we understand more clearly, then perhaps, but not now. Some knowledge is dangerous if it comes too soon." The interview was supposed to continue, but according to accounts from people in the studio that day, Dr. Hawass stood up and walked out, despite having agreed to an hour-long conversation. The station never aired that portion of footage in subsequent broadcasts. Requests for the raw footage have been denied, with officials claiming the tapes were damaged or lost. What could be so destabilizing that Egypt's chief archaeologist, a man known for his skepticism toward alternative theories, a man who spent his career defending Orthodox Egyptology, would refuse to discuss it? What could be beneath Giza that we're not ready to know about? Let's consider another site, halfway around the world. In Peru, beneath the ancient city of Cusco, the Inca capital that later became a Spanish colonial city and is now a tourist destination, there exists a network of tunnels called the Chincanas. The name means cave or tunnel in Quechua, but local legends say these passages are much more than simple caves. According to Inca tradition, these tunnels extend for miles, possibly connecting Cusco with other sacred sites including Sacsayhuaman, the massive fortress on a hill overlooking the city, and possibly reaching all the way to Machu Picchu, more than 50 miles away through mountainous terrain. The Inca said these tunnels weren't their creation. They found them, just as they found the massive megalithic stones of Sacsayhuaman that they couldn't replicate even at the height of their engineering prowess. They incorporated these ancient tunnels into their own constructions, using them for storage, for secret passages, for rituals, but they always acknowledged that someone else had built them originally. According to Inca tradition, these tunnels were built by the Viracachas, the bearded gods who came in the distant past, taught the ancestors of the Inca the arts of civilization, and then departed. But before leaving, the Viracachas sealed certain chambers deep in the tunnels, chambers that contained their knowledge and their tools, chambers that would remain closed until they returned. Spanish conquistadors in the 1530s heard these legends, and being Spanish conquistadors, immediately thought gold. If the Inca hid their treasures anywhere, surely it would be in these secret tunnels. Expeditions were mounted. Men carrying torches descended into the Chincanas beneath Cusco, following passages that stretched into the darkness beneath the city. Some never returned. After several days underground, when search parties went looking, they found no trace, no bodies, no equipment, nothing but abandoned torches at certain junctures where tunnels branched into multiple passages. Others emerged days later, but they weren't the same men who descended. Spanish priests documented their testimonies, filling pages with accounts that the church later tried to suppress because they suggested things the church didn't want to acknowledge. These men spoke of endless passages, of chambers filled with objects they couldn't describe, of sounds in the darkness that seemed like voices or like breathing, but that came from no visible source. They described lights that moved through the corridors even though no one carried torches there, lights that seemed to observe them, following them through the tunnels. Most disturbing were the accounts of doors. Not wooden doors or even metal gates, but solid surfaces that blocked passages. Surfaces that seemed to be made of stone, but that didn't match the surrounding rock, that were smooth and seamless, that couldn't be breached with picks or hammers. One conquistador, Diego de Alcobaso, wrote in his journal, now preserved in the archive of the Indies in Seville, "We found a door such as I have never seen, neither in Spain nor in the New World. It was of black stone, polished like glass, set into the living rock as if it had grown there. We could find no edge, no seam, no place where door met wall. We struck it with our tools, but it rang like a bell and showed no mark. And when we placed our ears against it, we heard movement on the other side. Not water, not wind, but footsteps perhaps. Or the sound of voices speaking in no language we knew. The Catholic Church, disturbed by these accounts and fearing that the tunnels might lead to pagan shrines that would tempt converted Indians back to their old gods, ordered the known entrances to be sealed with masonry and blessed with holy water. Priests performed exorcisms at several entrances before they were bricked up, suggesting they believed something demonic dwelt in those depths. Most of those sealed entrances remain closed to this day, though local people in Cusco say there are other entrances, hidden in the countryside outside the city, that lead down into the same network. They also say that occasionally, people disappear near these entrances, hikers who wander too close, children who explore where they shouldn't, urban explorers looking for adventure. In 2012, a team from the California Institute of Technology, working in cooperation with Peruvian archaeologists, used ground-penetrating radar to map the subsurface of Cusco's main plaza. The project was ostensibly to study Inca construction techniques and to locate possible archaeological features before modern development disturbed them. The results, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2013, showed extensive voids consistent with artificial construction beneath the city, extending at least 200 feet down into the bedrock. The paper noted that the scale and geometry of these subsurface features suggest intentional excavation rather than natural cave formation, and concluded that further investigation is warranted but will require resources and permissions beyond the scope of current research. In other words, there's something down there, something big, but we're not allowed to find out what it is. Dr. Rebecca Platt, the Caltech geophysicist who led the ground-penetrating radar survey, gave a presentation at the 2014 annual meeting of the Archaeological Institute of America. During the Q&A session, an audience member asked if she thought the tunnels might connect to other sites in the region, creating an underground network. Dr. Platt hesitated, then said, "The data suggests that possibility. Some of the passages we detected seem to extend beyond the range of our equipment. They might continue for considerable distances, but without permission to excavate or to extend our surveys, we can only speculate." Another audience member asked if she'd like to investigate further. Dr. Platt's answer was telling. "Of course I would. Any scientist would want to follow the data wherever it leads, but there are sensitivities, political concerns, religious concerns. Local people have strong feelings about these sites, and there are practical issues, safety, funding, permits. So for now, what's beneath Cusco remains a mystery." But her tone suggested there was more she wasn't saying. Diplomatic silence protecting information that might be controversial or dangerous to share. Are you beginning to see the pattern? Underground complexes in Turkey, Egypt, Peru. Massive constructions that predate or challenge our understanding of ancient capabilities, that show evidence of advanced engineering knowledge, that remain largely unexplored despite the obvious archaeological importance, blocked by official restrictions or sealed by ancient peoples who feared what they contained. And across all these sites, the same story. Passages descending into depths that haven't been fully mapped, chambers that can't be accessed, doors that can't be opened, and official explanations that don't quite satisfy the questions the evidence raises. Ancient Egyptian texts reference these chambers. The pyramid texts, some of the oldest religious writings in the world, speak of the ways of the hidden ones beneath the earth. The Book of the Dead describes chambers in the Jewet, the underworld, that are not metaphorical realms of the afterlife but physical places beneath the ground where the gods dwelt and where certain initiated priests could venture. Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt around 450 BCE, wrote of being told by Egyptian priests about massive halls beneath the Giza complex, filled with the records and wisdom of the ages, protected by guardians who ensured that only the worthy could access this knowledge. Scholars typically dismiss this as legendary embellishment, the sort of tall tale that ancient historians love to record. But what if the priests were describing something real? In 2008, Dr. Zahi Hawass, then Egypt's Minister of Antiquities, mentioned in an interview that mysteriously disappeared from most archives shortly after, that there are things beneath Giza that would change everything we think we know about Egyptian history, but the world is not ready to know about them yet. What could be so destabilizing? Let's consider another site, halfway around the world. In Peru, beneath the ancient city of Cusco, the Inca capital, there exists a network of tunnels called the Chincanas. Local legends say these tunnels extend for miles, connecting Cusco with other sacred sites, possibly even reaching all the way to Machu Picchu, more than 50 miles away. The Inca said these tunnels weren't their creation. They found them, just as they found the massive megalithic stones of Sacsayhuaman, and incorporated them into their own construction. According to Inca tradition, these tunnels were built by the Viracachas, the bearded gods who came in the distant past, taught the ancestors of the Inca the arts of civilization, and then departed. But before leaving, the Viracachas sealed certain chambers deep in the tunnels, chambers that contained their knowledge and their tools, chambers that would remain closed until they returned. Spanish conquistadors in the 1530s heard these legends and sent explorers into the tunnels beneath Cusco, searching for Inca gold. Some never returned. Others emerged days later, driven mad, speaking of endless passages, of chambers filled with objects they couldn't describe, of sounds in the darkness that seemed like voices or like breathing, of lights that moved through the corridors even though no one carried torches. The Catholic Church, disturbed by these accounts and fearing that the tunnels might lead to pagan shrines that would tempt converted Indians back to their old gods, ordered the known entrances to be sealed with masonry and blessed with holy water. Most remain sealed to this day, though local people say there are other entrances, hidden in the countryside, that lead down into the same network. 2012, a team from California Institute of Technology used ground-penetrating radar to map the subsurface of Cusco's main plaza. The results, published in a limited circulation archaeology journal, showed extensive voids consistent with artificial construction beneath the city, extending at least 200 feet down into the bedrock. The paper concluded that further investigation is warranted, but will require resources and permissions beyond the scope of current research. In other words, there's something down there, something big, but we're not allowed to find out what it is. Are you beginning to see the pattern? Section 3. The Keepers of the DEPTHS. If the Anunnaki didn't actually leave Earth but slipped underground, they wouldn't just vanish from the surface. They'd need people up top, trusted agents keeping an eye on things, protecting certain places, holding onto secrets, and quietly getting everything ready for the day they'd come back out. You can't just disappear for ages and expect to pick up where you left off without a plan. It's the same story in every ancient world. Priesthoods guarding secrets, keeping knowledge locked away. Let's dig deeper, not through layers of dirt, but into the past, into the mindset of those old priests. What did they really know? What were they trying so hard to protect? And why did they decide that regular folks shouldn't get anywhere near these secrets? Imagine yourself in ancient Sumer, maybe Nippur, around 2000 BCE. You're standing at the base of the great ziggurat of Enlil, the Ekkur, that massive mountain house at the heart of Mesopotamian religion. The building towers above you, each level painted its own color, all lined up with the stars. But you're not headed for the top, where everyone gathers for rituals. Someone's taking you down instead, into the roots of the temple, through doors most people don't even know exist. Your guide is an old high priest. He's got a shaved head, simple linen robes, expensive but not flashy. Around his neck, a blue lapis lazuli cylinder seal. It's his signature for official business, but it also marks him as one of the few allowed into places like this. You follow him down stone stairs, smooth from centuries of footsteps. The air's cooler here, damp. Somewhere nearby you hear the steady rush of water, not just a leak but a real underground stream. The walls look different down here, older, built with stones you don't recognize from nowhere close by. You reach a room with a bronze door, green from age, covered in warnings written in cuneiform. The priest pulls out a key, not metal but a crystal cylinder. He slides it into a slot in the door frame. There's a click, something shifts, and the heavy door swings open, smooth as anything, even though it shouldn't be possible with Bronze Age tech. Inside, you find the tablet house, the priest's hidden library. Shelves carved right into the rock are packed with clay tablets. Some are falling apart, so old the writing, almost gone. Others are fresh copies the scribes made to save what they could before the originals crumbled to dust. The Sumerian priests, especially in places like Eridu and Nippur, took these tablet houses seriously. But don't picture a public library. No one from outside the priesthood ever got in. These were vaults, not reading rooms. Only the initiated could walk these halls. The priests stored the most important texts here, locked away from the black-headed people, their own name for ordinary Sumerians. So what was on those tablets? Sure, a lot of it was normal stuff. Hymns, king lists, laws, medical advice, star charts. The kind of records you'd find in temples all across the ancient world. But in some private letters between priests, letters we've dug up and translated, they talk about something else. Sealed writings, texts not for the eyes of the black-headed people, words that must wait for the return of those who wrote them. There's a letter found at Nippur, thanks to a dig by the University of Pennsylvania back in the late 1800s. It's from a priest in Eridu writing to his friend in Nippur, mostly about the usual temple business, offerings, festivals, staff problems. But buried in the middle is a strange note. About the sealed tablets you asked about, they're still in the deep house where Enki put them. The guardians are still watching. No one tried to break the seals since King Shulgi's day. We follow the old rules. The copies are up in the tablet house for study, but the originals stay below until the return. When the gates open, when the dark waters rise, when those who went down choose to come up, then we'll break the seals and show the real knowledge. Until then, we protect it. The dark waters and those who descended might be purely metaphorical, references to underworld deities, to death and rebirth, to spiritual transformation. That's certainly how mainstream Sumerology interprets such passages. But what if they're not metaphorical? What if this priest was describing actual protocols, actual tablets kept in actual underground chambers, guarded by actual people, waiting for actual beings to return from actual places beneath the earth? These protected texts, if they existed, haven't been found, or rather, they haven't been made public. But consider this. We've recovered only a fraction of the tablets that once existed. Fire, water, deliberate destruction, simple decay. These have claimed the vast majority of Mesopotamia's written heritage. The tablets we do have were often preserved by accident, buried in collapsed buildings when cities were destroyed, discarded in ancient trash heaps where the dry climate protected them from moisture, incorporated into building fill when old structures were demolished and new ones built on top. We've found hundreds of thousands of tablets through such accidental preservation. But the most important texts, the ones the priests truly valued, those would have been protected differently. Those wouldn't have been left in collapsing buildings or thrown away as garbage. Those would have been taken to the deepest, most secure chambers, to the house of wisdom that no outsider can penetrate, to the Abzu itself, where neither looters nor the elements could destroy them. And if those chambers still exist, sealed beneath ancient sites, then the most important Sumerian texts, the ones that might explain who the Anunnaki really were, where they went, and how to contact them, might still be there, waiting in the darkness for someone to find them, or waiting for those who wrote them to return and reveal them. Egyptian priests operated under similar systems of secret knowledge and restricted access. The House of Life, attached to major temples, was both medical school and mystical academy, where priests learned not just how to treat diseases and interpret dreams, but also, according to some sources, how to communicate with the Neteru, the gods, in their hidden places. Dr. James Henry Breasted, the American Egyptologist who founded the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago, spent years studying the fragmentary texts that survive from these houses of life. In his personal notebooks, archived at the Oriental Institute and only recently digitized for scholarly access, he recorded his growing conviction that Egyptian priest-physicians possessed knowledge far beyond what their technology should have allowed. Breasted noted surgical techniques described in medical papyri that wouldn't be rediscovered until modern times, procedures for brain surgery, techniques for setting complex fractures, methods for treating cataracts. He documented pharmaceutical preparations using compounds whose efficacy modern chemistry has only recently validated. He found astronomical observations accurate to within fractions of a degree, made with instruments that supposedly didn't exist in pharaonic Egypt. In one notebook entry dated March 17, 1923, Breasted wrote, "Either we must revise our understanding of Egyptian technological capabilities significantly upward, or we must consider that they had access to knowledge from an earlier source, knowledge they were preserving and applying rather than discovering anew." The priests themselves claimed their wisdom came from those who built the first temples, from the followers of Horus, who ruled before the historical dynasties. Perhaps we should take these claims more literally than we have. Breasted never published these speculations. He was a respected academic, founder of one of the world's premier institutes for ancient studies, and he knew that suggesting Egyptian knowledge might derive from an unknown earlier civilization would destroy his credibility. So he kept his doubts private, confined to notebooks that most scholars have never bothered to read. Plutarch, the Greek-Roman historian and philosopher writing around 100 CE, recorded conversations with Egyptian priests that hint at this hidden knowledge. In his essay on Isis and Osiris, Plutarch describes visiting temples where priests showed him texts, written in letters known only to the initiated, and told him about rituals conducted in chambers beneath the earth, where they would descend to commune with Osiris in his hidden throne. Mainstream Egyptology interprets this as purely symbolic, Osiris as the god of the underworld, representing the afterlife and resurrection, not a physical location but a spiritual realm. The descent was metaphorical, a meditation or trance state where the priest identified with the dying and resurrected god. But Plutarch's language doesn't read as metaphorical. He describes physical descents, actual chambers, real darkness illuminated by lamps, stone corridors extending into the earth beneath temples. He writes of priests who spent days underground, emerging changed by what they encountered in those depths, speaking of revelations that couldn't be shared with the uninitiated. What did they experience down there? What did they encounter in chambers that archaeologists have never found, that might still exist sealed beneath the sands of Egypt? The pattern continues across other cultures. This tradition of priestly knowledge keepers who guard secrets too dangerous or too profound for common knowledge, who maintain contact with forces or beings that dwell beneath the earth, who preserve traditions about a time when gods walked among humans before retreating to hidden realms. In Tibet, certain Buddhist monasteries claim lineages of knowledge passed down from the beings of Shambhala, described in texts as existing in hidden valleys or beneath the mountains, in places where time moves differently and where wisdom is preserved until humanity is ready to receive it. The 14th Dalai Lama, in his 1962 book, My Land and My People, mentions these traditions carefully. There are in Tibet certain very old traditions, passed from master to disciple in unbroken chains for many centuries, that speak of places beneath the earth where great wisdom is preserved, where teachers wait who are not entirely of this world. These are not comfortable subjects for modern discussion, but they are part of our heritage, and some lamas maintain that these places are real, not symbolic. When the Dalai Lama speaks of the knowledge that comes from beneath, is this purely metaphorical, a reference to the deep unconscious, to buried wisdom within the human mind? Or is he carefully alluding to something more literal, to actual underground locations where actual teachers preserve actual knowledge? Among Native American tribes, particularly the Hopi of the American Southwest, oral traditions speak of the ant people, who sheltered their ancestors in underground cities during previous world ages, times of cataclysm when the surface became uninhabitable. These weren't insects despite the name. The Hopi described the ant people as intelligent beings who possessed sophisticated technology, who lived in vast underground complexes, who taught survival skills, agriculture, and respect for the earth. When the cataclysms ended and the surface became habitable again, the ant people retreated back into their subterranean homes, but they promised to return when needed again, when humanity faced another existential threat. Is this just mythology? Is the Hopi tradition of the ant people simply their version of creation mythology, comparable to other cultures' stories about beneficent gods or culture heroes? Anthropologists from the University of Arizona, including Dr. Robert Priusel from the University of Pennsylvania Museum, who have studied these traditions, note something peculiar. The Hopi descriptions of underground chambers match real features of the Southwest landscape, natural caves that show evidence of ancient habitation, and, curiously, modified chambers that seem to extend far deeper than natural erosion would create. Dr. Priusel, in a 2009 paper published in American Antiquity, wrote, "The Hopi oral traditions describe underground refuge sites with remarkable specificity, locations, chamber arrangements, water sources. When we investigate these locations, we consistently find exactly what the traditions describe: modified caves showing evidence of long-term habitation, ventilation shafts that shouldn't exist in natural formations, chambers that extend far beyond what erosion can explain." Either the Hopi have maintained extraordinarily accurate geographical knowledge across centuries of oral transmission, or they're describing places they've actually visited in living memory, places that remain occupied. That last suggestion, places that remain occupied, was controversial enough that Dr. Priusel's co-authors requested it be removed from the final published version. But it appears in the original manuscript draft, archived at the University Museum, visible to anyone who requests access to the pre-publication documents. What was Dr. Priusel suggesting? That the underground sites the Hopi describe aren't archaeological relics, but currently occupied spaces. Occupied by whom? In 1909, the Phoenix Gazette newspaper published a front-page article that has become infamous in alternative archaeology circles. The article, published on April 5, 1909, described a discovery by a Smithsonian-funded expedition led by Professor S.A. Jordan. According to the article, Jordan's team had found a massive network of caves in the Grand Canyon, containing Egyptian-style artifacts, mummies, and what appeared to be a sophisticated underground city carved from the canyon walls. The article provides remarkable details: hieroglyphics that resembled Egyptian writing but weren't quite the same, statues of unknown deities, weapons and tools made from copper, and a harder metal the expedition couldn't identify, chambers extending for miles into the rock, ventilation systems that kept the air fresh even in the deepest passages. The supposed location was described as being in a remote area of the Grand Canyon, accessible only by boat along the Colorado River, and then by a difficult climb up the canyon wall to a hidden entrance. The Smithsonian Institution has since denied that any such expedition took place. They state that no Professor S.A. Jordan was ever employed by them, no such discovery was ever made, and the article was either a hoax or a mistake. The Phoenix Gazette was known for sensationalistic journalism, and this story fit the pattern of fantastic archaeological discoveries that sold newspapers in the early 20th century. Case closed, hoax exposed. Not quite. Researchers who have attempted to locate the site described in the article, using the specific coordinates and landmarks mentioned, report that the area is now restricted, cordoned off by the National Park Service with no public access permitted. Signs warn that trespassing will result in federal charges. No explanation is provided for why this particular section of the canyon, indistinguishable from thousands of other sections, requires such strict protection. When park officials are asked about the restrictions, they give vague answers about archaeological sensitivity, sacred Native American sites, or unstable geological conditions. But they won't specify which tribe considers the area sacred, or what makes the geology unstable when similar terrain throughout the canyon is open to hikers. Several experienced Grand Canyon guides have stated privately that the restricted area has been off-limits for decades, far longer than typical archaeological site closures, which usually last only a few years while excavations are completed. One retired ranger, speaking anonymously to a researcher in 2015, said, "We were told in training never to let anyone approach that area, never to answer questions about why it's restricted, and to report anyone who showed too much interest in it. We weren't told what's there, just that it's classified and that National Park Service jurisdiction ends where another agency's begins. Which agency? We weren't told that either. What's being protected in that remote section of the Grand Canyon? What discovery, if any, requires restrictions that have lasted over a century? Why does a National Park Service ranger need to report citizens who ask questions about a supposedly empty section of canyon?" Now, let's pause and breathe. We're deep in this exploration, surrounded by questions that multiply faster than answers. Your body is relaxing into your bed. Perhaps your mind is drifting between waking awareness and the hypnagogic space where dreams begin. That's good. Let these mysteries wash over you. Let them settle into your consciousness without needing immediate resolution. What if priesthoods across the ancient world weren't different religions worshiping different gods, but different branches of the same organization, maintaining contact with the same hidden entities, the same Anunnaki who had withdrawn from surface contact, but not from Earth itself? The language they use is remarkably consistent when you strip away cultural differences. The gods dwell below. The priests must descend to receive wisdom. Knowledge comes from the depths. The sacred places are founded on the waters beneath the earth, a curious phrase that appears in Sumerian, Egyptian, Hebrew, Hindu, and even some Native American traditions, despite these cultures supposedly developing independently. But what if they didn't develop independently? What if they were all part of a network? A global system of temples and priesthoods connected not just through trade routes or cultural diffusion, but through something more direct, through actual underground passages that allowed movement and communication across vast distances, passages that the Anunnaki used when they needed to travel unseen between their various facilities and outposts. Consider the recent discoveries beneath the streets of Rome. In 2015, during construction of the Metro C line, the newest subway route designed to help reduce traffic in Rome's historic center, workers broke through into a series of tunnels that weren't on any historical maps. These weren't sewers. Rome's ancient cloaca maxima and other drainage systems are well documented and thoroughly explored. These weren't catacombs. The Christian burial tunnels are mapped and cataloged. These tunnels were something else. Older, deeper, built with techniques that didn't match any Roman construction method. The Italian Superintendency for Archaeological Heritage immediately classified the discovery. Metro construction was rerouted around the area. A brief press release stated that previously unknown archaeological features had been found and required specialized study. No details were provided. No photographs were released. No timeline was given for when information might be made public. That was 9 years ago. The tunnels remain classified. The construction detour remains in place, and the Italian authorities continue to refuse requests from archaeologists outside the official investigation to access or even learn basic details about what was found. But information leaks. It always does. Construction workers talk to their families. Archaeologists share information with colleagues over drinks. Reporters dig into stories that smell like cover-ups. A construction worker who'd been in the tunnels before they were sealed spoke to a local journalist from La Repubblica. The interview was conducted, the article was drafted, but before publication, the worker recanted his statement, and the story was killed. However, a copy of the original draft article was leaked to alternative archaeology websites. In that unpublished interview, the worker described passages extending far beyond what any Roman building would need. These weren't basements or sewers. These were transit tunnels, like they were built for traveling long distances underground. He described chambers that seemed to have no purpose we could understand. Big empty rooms with smooth walls, no decorations, no obvious function. And strangest of all, he described metal doors, still sealed, that we couldn't open and couldn't cut through. Our equipment couldn't even scratch the surface. One of the archaeologists tried some kind of chemical test to figure out what metal it was, and he got very quiet, packed up his equipment, and made some phone calls. After that, we were all ordered out and told the site was classified for national security reasons. Metal doors underground beneath Rome. Metal that modern cutting tools can't scratch. Chambers extending far beyond any Roman structure, and classification for national security reasons. What's down there? What did they find that required immediate secrecy, that couldn't be shared with the archaeological community, that remains restricted nearly a decade later? This is the pattern we see again and again. Discoveries that suggest extensive underground networks, official acknowledgement followed by immediate classification, researchers blocked from further investigation, sites declared off-limits without clear explanation. If the Anunnaki never left, if they're still here in hidden chambers beneath ancient sites, maintaining their presence while avoiding direct contact with surface humanity, then this pattern makes perfect sense. Those who discover the evidence too directly, who get too close to the sealed chambers, or who document things that shouldn't be made public, are turned away, silenced, discredited, or simply prevented from sharing what they've found. Not because of some sinister global conspiracy, necessarily, but because the understanding between the hidden ones and humanity's leadership might require discretion, might require that most people continue believing that the gods departed long ago, that we're alone now, that the ancient world was primitive and we are advanced. But what if we're not alone? What if beneath our cities, beneath our sacred sites, beneath the places we consider most holy or most ancient, there are chambers that remain occupied, facilities that remain operational, beings that continue watching, continue recording, continue waiting for the time when the covenant of separation ends and contact can resume. The Sumerian priesthood, particularly at Eridu and later at Nippur, maintained what they called the Tablet House, or House of Wisdom. These weren't libraries in our modern sense, collections of literature available for public reading. They were restricted archives, chambers where only initiated priests could enter, where the most important texts were kept under guard. What were these texts? We know from the thousands of tablets that have survived and been translated that some contained religious hymns, king lists, legal codes, medical treatises, astronomical observations, standard historical material. But priests themselves, in letters to each other and in cryptic references in administrative texts, speak of other tablets, the sealed writings, the texts not for the eyes of the black-headed people, the Sumerian term for ordinary humans, the words that must wait for the return of those who wrote them. These texts, if they existed, haven't been found. Or rather, they haven't been made public. But consider this. We've recovered only a fraction of the tablets that once existed. Fire, water, deliberate destruction, simple decay. These have claimed the vast majority of Mesopotamia's written heritage. The tablets we do have were often preserved by accident, buried in collapsed buildings, or discarded in ancient trash heaps where the dry climate protected them. But the most important texts, the ones the priests truly valued, those would have been protected differently. Those would have been taken below, into the sealed chambers beneath the temples, into the Abzu itself, where neither looters nor the elements could destroy them. Egyptian priests operated under similar secrecy. The House of Life, attached to major temples, was both medical school and mystical academy, where priests learned not just how to treat diseases and interpret dreams, but also, according to some sources, how to communicate with the Neteru, the gods, in their hidden places. Plutarch, writing in the 1st century CE, recorded conversations with Egyptian priests who told him that certain sacred texts were written in letters known only to the initiated, and described rituals conducted in chambers beneath the earth, where priests would descend to commune with Osiris in his hidden throne. Mainstream Egyptology interprets this as purely symbolic, Osiris as the god of the underworld, the afterlife, not a physical place but a spiritual realm. But what if the symbols meant what they said? What if there were actual chambers, actual communication, actual communion with entities that dwelt beneath the temples? The pattern continues in other cultures. In Tibet, certain Buddhist monasteries claim lineages of knowledge passed down from the beings of Shambhala, described in texts as existing in hidden valleys or beneath the mountains, in places where time moves differently and where wisdom is preserved until humanity is ready to receive it. When the Dalai Lama speaks of the knowledge that comes from beneath, is this purely metaphorical? Among Native American tribes, particularly the Hopi of the American Southwest, oral traditions speak of the Ant people, who sheltered their ancestors in underground cities during previous world ages, times of cataclysm when the surface became uninhabitable. The Ant people were described as wise, benevolent beings who possessed technology and knowledge far beyond early humans. They taught survival skills, agriculture, and respect for the earth before retreating back into their subterranean homes, promising to return when needed again. Anthropologists from the University of Arizona, who have studied these traditions, note that the Hopi descriptions of underground chambers match real features of the Southwest landscape. Natural caves that show evidence of ancient habitation, and, curiously, modified chambers that seem to extend far deeper than natural erosion would create. In 1909, the Phoenix Gazette newspaper published a front-page article describing a discovery by a Smithsonian-funded expedition led by Professor S.A. Jordan. According to the article, Jordan's team had found a massive network of caves in the Grand Canyon, containing Egyptian-style artifacts, mummies, and what appeared to be a sophisticated underground city carved from the canyon walls. The Smithsonian Institution has since denied that any such expedition took place, stating that no Professor S.A. Jordan was ever employed by them, and no such discovery was ever made. The article is dismissed as a hoax, an example of the yellow journalism common in the early 20th century. But researchers who have attempted to locate the site described in the article, giving specific coordinates and landmarks, report that the area mentioned is now restricted, cordoned off by the National Park Service with no public access permitted. When asked why, park officials give vague answers about archaeological sensitivity and sacred Native American sites. What's being protected or what's being hidden? Now let's take a breath here. Let your shoulders relax. We're deep in this journey now, suspended between documented history and tantalizing possibility. The darkness outside your window might seem a little deeper, a little more full of mystery. That's good. Let yourself sink into that feeling. The ancient world is reaching out across millennia, whispering questions that have no easy answers. What if priesthoods across the ancient world weren't different religions worshiping different gods, but different branches of the same organization, maintaining contact with the same hidden entities, the same Anunnaki who had withdrawn from surface contact, but not from Earth itself? The language they use is remarkably consistent when you strip away cultural differences. The gods dwell below. The priests must descend to receive wisdom. Knowledge comes from the depths. The sacred places are founded on the waters beneath the earth, a curious phrase that appears in Sumerian, Egyptian, Hebrew, and Hindu texts, despite these cultures developing independently according to standard history. But what if they didn't develop independently? What if they were all part of a network, a system of temples connected not just symbolically, but literally, through underground passages that allowed movement and communication across vast distances, passages that the Anunnaki used when they needed to travel unseen? Sound far-fetched? Consider the recent discoveries beneath the streets of Rome. In 2015, during construction of a new metro line, workers broke through into a series of tunnels that weren't on any historical maps. These weren't sewers or catacombs. Those were already well documented. These were older, deeper, lined with perfectly fitted stone blocks that showed no tool marks, built with techniques that didn't match any Roman construction method. The Italian government immediately classified the discovery. The metro construction was rerouted. A brief statement was released saying that previously unknown archaeological features had been found and required specialized study. No details, no photographs, no timeline for when information might be released to the public. A construction worker who'd been in the tunnels before they were sealed spoke to a local newspaper, before being fired and pressured to recant his statement. He described passages extending far beyond what any Roman building would need, chambers that seemed to have no purpose we could understand, and strangest of all, metal doors, still sealed, that we couldn't open and couldn't cut through. Metal doors, in structures predating Roman metalworking technology. The article was retracted. The worker disappeared from public record. The tunnels remain sealed, and anyone asking questions is told that it's an ongoing investigation with no estimated completion date. This is the pattern we see again and again. Discoveries that suggest extensive underground networks, official acknowledgement followed by immediate classification, researchers blocked from further investigation, sites declared off-limits without clear explanation. If the Anunnaki never left, if they're still here in hidden chambers beneath ancient sites, maintaining their presence while avoiding direct contact with surface humanity, then this pattern makes perfect sense. Those who discover the evidence too directly, who get too close to the sealed chambers, would need to be turned away, silenced, or discredited. Not because of some sinister conspiracy, necessarily, but because the understanding between the hidden ones and humanity's leadership might require discretion, require that most people continue believing that the gods departed long ago, that we're alone now, that the ancient world was primitive and we are advanced. But what if we're not alone? What if we've never been alone? Section 4. The evidence they left behind. If the Anunnaki didn't leave Earth but slipped underground instead, they'd need more than just a place to hide. They'd have to keep their tech alive, power sources, air systems, a way to talk to each other down there, maybe even tunnels or trains connecting secret bases. And honestly, this isn't just wild speculation. When you start poking around ancient sites, you run into evidence that doesn't add up. Weird artifacts, unexplained happenings, hints of advanced technology where there shouldn't be any. Let's talk about something that's really hard to ignore: electromagnetic anomalies. Back in the 1970s, Egyptian and American scientists combed over the Giza plateau with magnetometers, tools that pick up on magnetic fields. Their official reports were exactly what you'd expect. The readings matched the limestone and granite in the area, nothing surprising. But buried in their early notes was something strange, data that vanished from the final reports. They'd found powerful electromagnetic fields coming from under the pyramids, especially beneath the Great Pyramid. And these weren't just Earth's natural magnetism. These were sharp, regular pulses, almost like a signal or some kind of power source humming under the ground. Dr. Ali Barakat, an Egyptian physicist who worked on those surveys, once mentioned in a Cairo University lecture, the recording, gone now, scrubbed from the archives, that these readings looked like operating technology, not geology. The strength and rhythm, he said, pointed to something artificial. When people pressed him for details, Barakat admitted his team was told to leave out the weird data in public reports because it couldn't be explained with current science. He wanted to keep digging, to use better tech, but said authorities blocked any follow-up. And Giza isn't alone. Other ancient sites show similar weirdness. Take Baalbek in Lebanon. That's where you find the trilithon, the biggest stone blocks any ancient people ever moved, around 800 tons each. In the 1990s, ground-penetrating radar picked up artificial-looking voids deep under the Roman temple complex. These weren't just random caves. They followed patterns way too regular to be natural. Magnetometer readings around those giant stones also spiked in odd ways, especially at night when solar interference drops. Rocks don't just start poolsing at midnight. If anything, that lines up better with hidden tech than with simple geology. Then there, Sacsayhuaman in Peru. MIT researchers did a quiet study there in the early 2000s, checking those massive, perfectly fitted stones, some over 100 tons each. Their findings never made it to formal publication, but word still got out. They found low-frequency vibrations in the stones at dawn and dusk, coming from below the site. Not earthquakes, not traffic, something humming underneath. Off the record, one team member said, "If I had to guess, I'd say we were picking up the sound of machinery, maybe huge machines, deeper than we could reach with our gear." You hear about these electromagnetic and vibrational oddities at so many sites, in so many countries, from so many research teams, that it's tough to chalk it all up to bad equipment or nature playing tricks. Something's producing those signals. Something running down there nonstop under our feet. But honestly, the biological stuff is even weirder. In sealed rooms under old temples, places with no airflow, where nothing should survive, scientists sometimes find the impossible: living organisms. In 2000, for example, microbiologists led by Dr. Russell Vreeland cracked open salt crystals from a sealed chamber under an ancient New Mexican mine. They woke up bacteria that carbon dated to 250 million years ago, way before humans showed up. So how can life last that long, locked away in total isolation? That's a puzzle with no easy answer. The answer appears to be that these environments aren't truly sealed. There must be air circulation, nutrient exchange, energy input. The bacteria were in a state of minimal metabolism but not complete dormancy, suggesting that the chambers they were found in connect to some larger system that sustains life. More disturbingly, in 2018, a Thai-British archaeological team exploring caves connected to the ancient Khmer temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia reported finding biological specimens that couldn't be immediately classified, according to their preliminary field notes. These notes, posted briefly to the team's website before being removed, described discovering in a sealed chamber organic matter that appeared to be in stasis, possibly tissue samples or botanical specimens, preserved in a medium we couldn't identify chemically. The team's lead archaeologist requested additional laboratory analysis, but was informed that the samples had been lost in transit to the laboratory. The cave entrance was subsequently sealed by Cambodian authorities, and the team's permits for further exploration were revoked without explanation. What were those samples? Why were they confiscated? What would biological material be doing in chambers sealed since ancient times, preserved in unknown media? One possibility that no mainstream scientist will publicly consider. What if those chambers weren't sealed by ancient humans thousands of years ago, but are maintained by someone, something, that's still here? Consider the implications. If underground chambers contain life support systems, if they show signs of ongoing activity, if electromagnetic and biological signatures suggest current operation rather than ancient abandonment, then we're not looking at archaeological sites. We're looking at occupied facilities. The sealed doors that Roman workers couldn't cut through, the electromagnetic pulses beneath Giza, the vibrating stones at Sacsayhuaman, the biological specimens in Cambodian caves. These aren't remnants of the past. They're features of a present we refuse to acknowledge. Now here's where the evidence becomes even more peculiar, and where we need to tread carefully between documented fact and speculative interpretation. There are accounts, scattered, often dismissed, sometimes suppressed, of people who have gone deeper into ancient sites than they were supposed to go, who have found doorways or passages that led them into chambers that felt wrong, that felt occupied, that made them turn back in instinctive fear. In 1971, a team of French speleologists exploring caves beneath the Giza Plateau, without official permission, reported via radio that they'd found a passage descending far deeper than we anticipated, and that they were going to investigate. That was their last transmission. Egyptian military sealed the cave entrance. An official report stated that the team had died due to lack of oxygen in an unmapped chamber. Their bodies were never recovered, and family members who pressed for more information were told that the cave system is too unstable for further investigation. A member of the Egyptian rescue team, speaking years later to a French documentary crew, contradicted the official story. He said that when they entered the caves, they found the French team's equipment abandoned at the mouth of a shaft descending into the bedrock, equipment that showed no signs of struggle or oxygen deprivation. More puzzling, the shaft itself, which should have been natural rock, showed signs of being carved or burned, with walls so smooth they reflected our flashlights like glass. The rescue team descended approximately 100 feet before encountering a door, a metal door, seamless, with no handles or hinges visible, embedded in the rock as if it had been there since the stone itself formed. They tried to force it, tried cutting tools, tried explosives, small charges. Nothing affected the door's surface, not a scratch. And then, according to this testimony, they heard something on the other side. Not rocks shifting, not water dripping. Voices, or something like voices, speaking in no language they recognized, with tones that weren't quite human, pitched in frequencies that made their teeth ache. They left. They sealed the entrance to the cave. The official story was written, and the French speleologists remain missing to this day, their fates unknown, their final discovery buried under layers of bureaucracy and official denial. Stories like this appear across the world from different sites, different time periods, but with eerie consistency. People descend into places they shouldn't go. They find evidence of habitation. They hear sounds, see lights, sometimes encounter figures that their minds struggle to process. And then either they flee, or they're removed, or they're discredited, and the entrances are sealed. Is this proof of anything? Not in the scientific sense. These are anecdotes, testimony that can't be verified, claims that can't be tested. But the pattern exists. The whispers exist. The sealed entrances exist. The official denials exist. And beneath it all, the ancient texts exist. Texts written by priests who claim to descend into the Abzu, who claim to commune with the Anunnaki in their hidden dwellings, who insisted they were documenting real experiences, not myths. What if they were telling the truth? Section 5. The Waiting ONES. Let's step back a bit, out of the depths, both literal and metaphorical, and really think about what all this means. There's something intriguing, almost unsettling about the idea that the Anunnaki never actually left Earth. Maybe they just slipped into the background, hiding out, keeping watch, maybe even guiding us from the shadows while we figured things out for ourselves. But why would they do that? If you look at the ancient Sumerian texts, the relationship between the Anunnaki and humanity comes off as complicated. They didn't just create us, at least not from scratch. They took early humans and tweaked us, gave us a boost so we'd be smarter and more useful, mainly for their own projects, farming, mining, whatever they needed. But then we grew up, started asking questions, got a bit unruly. The Anunnaki had a choice. They could keep ruling over us, playing God from their temples, but that meant always stepping in, always watching, always running the show. It kept us dependent, stuck in a kind of eternal childhood. If they wanted us to grow up, they had to let go. So maybe they pulled back. Maybe they decided to let us stumble around, make mistakes, learn the hard way, but not disappear entirely. They'd stay close, just out of sight, ready to step in if we ever got too close to wiping ourselves out. Maybe they left a few breadcrumbs, a bit of knowledge here, a bloodline there, so they could return if things went sideways. The old stories hint at this. Not everyone among the Anunnaki agreed if you believe the myths. Take the Epic of Gilgamesh. There's this moment where Gilgamesh seeks out Utnapishtim, the Sumerian version of Noah, who survived the Great Flood. The Anunnaki wanted to wipe out humanity with a flood, but Enki, the one who always sided with humans, tipped off Utnapishtim, helped him build an ark, and so life survived. Afterward, the Anunnaki kind of regretted it. They realized they needed us, or maybe just that erasing humanity wasn't the solution. So they made a deal. Humanity gets another shot, but they'd fade into the background. We'd get to rebuild, but this time, without them constantly looking over our shoulders. But stepping back isn't the same as leaving. It's more like going undercover, watching from afar but always able to jump back in if something big happened. What kind of event would bring them out of hiding? Nuclear war, for one. Ancient Indian texts talk about weapons called Brahmastra, basically bombs that sound an awful lot like nukes. They unleashed the power of the sun, blasted cities to dust, left radiation behind. Were these just wild stories? Or were they memories of ancient wars with real weapons? If those things actually existed, maybe their use forced the Anunnaki to step in before. Fast forward to our own time. We nearly triggered nuclear war more than once during the Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The world was right on the edge. Some historians say we only held back because a few commanders refused to follow disastrous orders. But what made those commanders pause? Was it just their own instincts, or was something nudging them quietly from behind the scenes? Maybe something, or someone, who remembered what nuclear war really looked like and wasn't about to let history repeat itself. I'm not saying this is what happened. I'm just asking, what if? What if we've made it this far, despite all our self-destructive tendencies, because we're not alone? What if there are invisible guardrails, gentle pushes in the right direction, coming from beings who never truly left? And then there's the whole UFO thing. The rise in sightings around nuclear sites is real. It's not just some fringe theory. The US military has admitted that UFOs, now called UAPs, keep popping up near nuclear missile facilities, power plants, even nuclear ships. Sometimes these things mess with the systems, shutting down missiles or interfering with reactors, then vanishing. That's not just a coincidence. Former Air Force officers, including Captain Robert Salas, have testified under oath that in 1967 at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, a glowing red object appeared above their facility and simultaneously disabled 10 nuclear missiles, rendering them inoperable for hours. This wasn't a mechanical failure. It was a targeted shutdown of sophisticated systems that shouldn't have been vulnerable to external interference. Similar incidents have been reported at nuclear sites in Russia, the UK, and France. The pattern is clear. Nuclear weapons attract attention from something that has the capability to neutralize them. The standard extraterrestrial hypothesis suggests these are aliens from other star systems, concerned about our nuclear capability. But what if it's simpler than that? What if these aren't visitors from distant worlds but residents of this world, beings who have been here all along, who have retreated underground but who have maintained surveillance and intervention capabilities for the very scenarios that threaten the planet they still inhabit? The Anunnaki, if they're still here, would have a vested interest in preventing nuclear holocaust. This is their world too. The underground chambers they occupy would be vulnerable to seismic disturbances, to radiation contamination, to the collapse of ecosystems they depend on. They wouldn't intervene openly. That would violate the covenant of withdrawal, would create panic, would infantilize humanity by making us dependent on divine protection. But subtle interventions, a disabled missile here, a voice in a commander's head counseling caution there, a technical malfunction at just the right moment. That's different. That's the gentle hand on the steering wheel, keeping us from driving over the cliff. Now, as you lie there listening to this, you might be thinking, this is fantastical. This requires believing in so many unproven things, that the Anunnaki were real physical beings, that they created or modified humanity, that they possessed advanced technology, that they're still here in underground bases, that they intervene in human affairs when necessary. And you're right to be skeptical. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and what I've presented tonight is a tapestry woven from threads of archaeology, mythology, anomalous phenomena, whistleblower testimony, and speculative interpretation. None of it constitutes proof in the scientific sense. But consider this: absence of proof is not proof of absence. We've explored less than 0.1% of the ocean floor. Vast underground networks remain unmapped. Ancient sites are protected from thorough investigation by governments concerned about national heritage, or by military installations coincidentally built atop ruins. The deepest we've ever drilled into the Earth is about 7.5 miles at the Kola Superdeep borehole in Russia, barely scratching the surface of a planet with a radius of nearly 4,000 miles. If the Anunnaki wanted to remain hidden, if they had millennia to perfect their concealment, if they possessed technology even marginally more advanced than ours, they could easily remain undetected by mainstream science while still maintaining a presence. And perhaps that's the point. Perhaps the covenant isn't just about them stepping back from direct rule. Perhaps it's also about us developing the wisdom and maturity to seek them out properly, to demonstrate we're ready for contact by first proving we can govern ourselves without destroying the planet in the process. Every ancient tradition speaks of a return. The Sumerian tablets, the biblical prophets, the Hindu avatars, the Buddhist Maitreya, the Hopi emergence into the fifth world. These traditions describe a time when the hidden ones come back into the open, when the teachers return, when humanity is judged ready, or perhaps judged necessary, for the next phase of cosmic relationship. What triggers the return? The texts aren't entirely clear, but they hint at certain conditions. The completion of astronomical cycles, the development of certain technologies, the reaching of critical thresholds in human consciousness or population or environmental impact. We're approaching several of those thresholds now. Our technology is advancing exponentially. Our population has reached levels unsustainable by current methods. Our environmental impact threatens the stability of planetary systems. And astronomically, we're at the end of several major cycles. The precession of the equinoxes, the alignment of our solar system with the galactic plane, cycles the ancients tracked with obsessive precision. Are we approaching a time of return? Not a return from distant space, but an emergence from deep places. A revelation of what's been hidden, a disclosure of who's been watching. I don't have answers to these questions, but I think it's worth asking them, worth sitting with them in the quiet darkness, worth imagining that the ancient stories might be less metaphorical than we've assumed, that the sealed chambers might contain more than dust and bones, that the electromagnetic pulses beneath sacred sites might be signs of ongoing habitation rather than geological quirks. What if the gods never left? What if they're still here, beneath our feet, waiting for the moment when humanity is ready to know the truth. Closing soft resolution and meditation. Let's come back now, back to the surface, back to your room, back to right now. You've wandered with me through old ruins, strange texts, dark caves, wild theories. We've crossed the line where history blurs into legend, where hard evidence runs out and speculation takes over. Breathe, feel your body against your bed, the air on your skin, the softness of your pillow, the gentle dark. This is your space. You're safe. You're here. The thing about these questions, about ancient gods and hidden chambers, locked doors and weird electromagnetic signals, whether we're alone out here or someone's watching, is that you don't need an answer tonight. Let them linger. Let them spin around your mind as you drift toward sleep. Let them slip into your dreams, connecting you to the old world and to the idea that our story is far stranger and bigger than we think. Who knows? Maybe the Anunnaki never left. Maybe they're deep underground, watching, waiting for us to catch up, waiting for us to grow up enough to handle the truth about who we are and why they're still here. Maybe those locked doors open in our lifetime, or our kids, or centuries from now. Maybe disclosure isn't a sudden moment, but a slow process that takes generations. Or maybe it's already happening. Maybe it's a trickle, not a flood. Little hints, strange news about UAPs buzzing nuclear sites, discoveries of underground chambers that make no sense if you stick to the official story, quiet words from people who have seen too much and keep it to themselves, waiting for a world that won't laugh or punish them for speaking up. Think about the people we've talked about tonight. Dr. Margaret Cohen, poring over old tablets in Chicago. Dr. Omer Demir, tracking tool marks in Turkish caves. Dr. Thomas Dobke, running seismic scans under Giza until his permits vanished after he found something interesting. Or Captain Robert Salas, watching 10 nukes shut down as a red light hovered over his base. Or those French explorers who went too deep under Giza and never came back. These folks, scientists, soldiers, explorers, they brushed up against something huge. They stepped over a line they weren't supposed to cross. They saw things that don't fit the official version. Each one is a piece of a bigger picture you only see if you step back far enough. Then again, maybe all those chambers are empty. Maybe the old stories are just that, stories. Maybe everything weird has a simple explanation we just haven't found yet. Maybe we really are alone, just biology and chemistry and time, not the work of secret gods lurking in the dark. But the question itself is the gift. Wondering ties us back to the people who came before, people who carved their questions into clay and hid them deep. Hopping someone like you would stumble onto them and keep asking, keep searching, never settle for easy answers when the truth could be stranger and more beautiful than anyone guessed. So tonight, as you close your eyes, picture yourself going down into one of those ancient chambers. Don't be afraid, be curious, respectful. The stone is cool under your hand as you feel your way down the tight spiral stairs. The air is thick with earth and time, minerals and damp, that odd underground smell you only find where people almost never go. Your light, maybe a flashlight, maybe a torch, maybe just the faint glow of something alive on the walls, only reaches so far into the black. Every step carries you further from the world you know, deeper into the waiting silence. But you're not alone. You can tell there's something there, old, patient, aware, not dangerous, not exactly friendly either, just present, watching, waiting. It's been waiting for thousands of years, and it'll wait thousands more if it has to, until the right moment comes, until someone's finally ready to understand. Is it real? Is it imagination? Does the distinction matter when the feeling itself is genuine? When the connection to something larger than yourself shifts your understanding of what's possible? When the question itself expands your sense of the world beyond the narrow certainties we cling to for comfort? Breathe deeply. Let your body sink into your bed, heavy and relaxed. Let the questions fade into the background, becoming white noise, becoming the sound of the earth itself breathing in deep rhythms beneath you. In and out, slow, ancient, eternal. The Anunnaki, whether they're here or gone, whether they were gods or aliens or something we don't have words for yet, whether they created us or merely influenced us, left us with the gift of wonder. The ability to look at ruins and see stories, to read ancient texts and feel connections across millennia, to explore dark places and imagine what might be hidden there, to contemplate the possibility that we're not alone and never have been. That gift is ours whether the literal truth of their existence is confirmed or not. The gift is in the asking, in the seeking, in the willingness to imagine that reality might be stranger and more wonderful than we've been taught to believe. So sleep now, knowing that beneath your feet, the earth holds mysteries we've barely begun to uncover, that beneath ancient sites, chambers wait in darkness, sealed or open, empty or occupied, silent or humming with activity we can't yet detect, that the story of humanity and our relationship with whoever or whatever guided us in our infancy is far from over. The gods may have left, the gods may be hidden, or the gods may be preparing, even now, to return to the surface and to us, to resume a relationship that was interrupted but never truly ended, to reveal truths that will transform our understanding of who we are and where we came from and what we might become. And when that day comes, if it comes, we'll be ready, because we never stopped looking, we never stopped asking, we never stopped imagining what might be possible. Because wonder is what makes us human, what connects us to the divine, what keeps the ancient covenant alive even when the gods themselves seem absent. Good night, sleep well, and may your dreams take you into the depths where truth and mystery become one, where past and future converge, where the sealed doors wait for the hand that knows how to open them.